Sorry. I'm trying to figure out. Friends, colleagues, good morning. Welcome to this session for this morning on the critical enablers for South Africa's green hydrogen economy. We've got really a high-powered panel with us, with our facilitator Veronica from the IFC, Hendrik from the Northern Cape, Juan Pablo from UNIDO, Priscilla from Sasol, and Masopa from the presidency. We also have connecting with us on the line, Stefan. We're excited about this session. It's going to be about an important discussion that we all have been having, and is indeed one of the critical engagement points for this COP27. It's about green hydrogen. And we're looking at green hydrogen at a time, particularly in South Africa, where there's a lot of attention around the carbon intensity of our economy and how we can get to transition from this carbon intensive economy into the net zero position that we've set ourselves on. And it is clear that green hydrogen is going to play a massive role in getting the world to transition to net zero. If you look, for example, the predictions of the Hydrogen Council, that by 2050, South Africa is expected, or rather, green hydrogen is expected to make a 20% contribution to the emissions reductions leading us to 2050. There's a particular excitement, as I said again, when it comes to South Africa, because on the one hand, we're dealing with the issue around the carbon intensity, but of course, as one may have noticed in an analyst report by JP Morgan, we're finding a situation here where there is this pivoting of turning carbon from a position of loss to one of progress, of success through what is provided by the opportunity of green hydrogen. When you look particularly in the space of South Africa and the contribution that is likely to be made, and it is predicted that we'll make in terms of global supply between 3 to 5 million tons of green hydrogen, as well as derivatives into the globe. We do consider ourselves to be in a position of particular competitive advantage, having regard to, amongst others, first, the endowment we have in relation to solar and wind energy, the benefit of our platinum group metals that we have and the role that they play in this value chain, a young population. And you also add into that, of course, what we're particularly proud of from a Sasol perspective, our proprietary position in Fischer-Tropsch. And as we've said, in relation to the FT technology, it is agnostic as to the source of carbon. And so we see this as effectively enabling a lot of us to have a credible pathway in relation to net zero. As you know, Sasol has already committed to net zero by 2050, reduction by 30% of its greenhouse gas emissions from up to 2030, using the 2017 baseline. So we're excited around what is going to be looked at in relation to this panel. And with that, I want to hand over to Veronica. Thank you so much.
Is that better? Okay, thank you so much. Vuyo, that was fantastic scene setting. Thank you. We don't have a lot of time. We don't have a lot of time here in this room with you. We've got about 55 minutes now, 6 experts to hear from, but we don't have a lot of time as a country, as South Africa, to develop green hydrogen in a way that is going to be in time for the just transition. So we're going to move fast today. So it's going to parallel how quickly we need to move in this process of developing green hydrogen. I am going to be calling on our expert speakers, and I'm going to ask them to respond short and quick to my questions, so that after a couple of rounds of their most important points, the points we haven't already heard at COP this week about green hydrogen, then I want to come to you. And when I invite you to make a reflection or ask a question, I also need you to be short and quick so that we can hear from as many voices as possible. Is that okay? Can you nod in agreement with me? Fantastic. Thank you. Priscilla, may I turn to you first? There is some skepticism outside. I don't know if you noticed, because there's a lot of fossil fuel execs at COP this year. And I wanted to invite you. Why is Sasol here? Why is it so important for you to be here? And why are you so focused on green hydrogen?
Thanks, Veronica. Am I audible? Okay, thank you. I think first of all, thank you all for joining us. As Sasol, we feel privileged to be part of the South Africa ambition that has been eloquently articulated around the 2050 net zero ambition. And as part of that, while we see the skepticism around fossil-based companies, we do believe that this is a collaboration between the private sector as well as the public government. Going forward, when you think about the uncertainty as well as the opportunities that are ahead of us, you need the integrated enablements as well as the capabilities of both private sector as well as the public sector to be able to drive that. And as Sasol, as the biggest petrochemical and energy supplier in the region, we are honored to be part of that. We are very clear around our net zero ambition, what it is, how we're going to achieve it, and we already have tangible underpin activities that we're already driving. And we believe that for South Africa to meet its own planet, social and economic imperatives, we are at the heart of that.
Thank you so much. Can I follow up, Priscilla? So don't turn your mic off yet. Vuyo gave us a great kind of high level of what's special about South Africa and the green hydrogen future. And I wonder if you could just give us a little more detail. What are some of the ingredients of the secret sauce, the peri-peri that South Africa has when it comes to the green hydrogen opportunity?
Thanks, Veronica. Even though they say ladies first, this sounds like an ambush. I don't mind to follow guys at times. And as you know, I'm also very passionate about diversity and inclusion, and this panel is a bit intimidating, but I'll go into your question specifically. Fundamentally, Vuyo has already alluded to some of the key things that we believe are quite critical. I think, first of all, the fact that we are blessed with endowments. If you look at our renewables, both solar as well as wind, they are globally competitive to some of the countries such as Chile, Australia, that have set themselves a clear ambition to become a hydrogen production hub. At the same time, we have platinum group metals that are very critical to beneficiate our resources going forward rather than export and import finished products, to ensure that we can actually play a critical role in producing equipment during the transition. And I think thirdly, our partnerships from a trade perspectives are very important. So when you look at the long-term relationships we've enjoyed with global countries such as Asia, such as Europe, it's very important that we actually leverage on that. And then Vuya's also mentioned, we've got access to land, we've got access to our Fischer-Tropsch technology. I'm gonna put Sasol on a mark again. We operate in 22 countries. We are the biggest at this stage gray hydrogen producer, 2.5 million tons. We know how to handle it. We know how to transport it. We are supplying customers with it. We are using it for our own operations. So all of those advantages coupled together put South Africa on a huge opportunity, but also from an energy flow and trade flow perspective, we are at the bottom, at the tip of that continent. We're seeing a lot of flows from shipping perspective. So also as we decarbonize the hard to abate industries, we have a huge opportunity to play in the maritime as well. So this is exciting for us.
Thank you so much, Priscilla. So you've been very articulate about how Sasol, I think, as a company is prepared to benefit, how South Africa as a country has the opportunity to benefit, and the planet will benefit. I'd love to turn now to my fellow panelists here to focus a little more on the benefit sharing. Who specifically, which stakeholders locally do we see benefiting from this? Because I think it's hard sometimes for everyday people to get their head around green hydrogen and why this is an agenda that they want to be bought into. So I'd love each of you to talk about one stakeholder group that's going to tangibly benefit from this process, but also if you could forecast for us a little bit, when are they likely to see those benefits? So if I could stop with you, Masopa. And we have a little bit of competition here with the club going next door, but I'm sure you can carry through, please.
Great. Thank you very much for inviting me to be on the panel. I hope everybody can hear me. I think just to contextualize the benefit, it's worth taking a step back for a moment and really understanding what South Africa's ambitions are in terms of green hydrogen. We, as Priscilla has articulately said, are uniquely positioned to be able to be a major supplier to the world of green hydrogen and green hydrogen derivatives in a market competitive way. We also are uniquely positioned in terms of being able to meet sort of European and Eastern market demand. But importantly, from a South Africa perspective, we don't see green hydrogen only as a vector for supplying an additional renewable energy on an export basis to the rest of the world. We do see exports leading because of the price premium that green hydrogen carries and the developed economy's ability to be able to carry that price premium. But fundamentally, from a South African perspective, we see green hydrogen as a vector for the reindustrialization of the country. We see it as a unique opportunity to marry our mineral endowment with our renewable energy endowment and attract heavy industry back to South Africa in a competitive way, to offer sort of niche green products like green steel, which is why Sasol and ArcelorMittal's announcement in the last few weeks is so exciting. It brings sort of a tangible benefit to communities to see in practical terms what this reindustrialization agenda could mean and could look like, and offer an opportunity to sort of small enclave and community like Saldanha Bay to create thousands of jobs. So I think that's one example, but I think the sort of message from a South Africa perspective is that we see this permeating through the economy and being driven on an industrial agenda.
Beautifully said. Thank you so much. Very tangible. I wonder, Hendrik, can I turn to you?
Yes, thank you very much. I think firstly, from the Northern Cape side, we're the tip of the spear. We're one of the 9 provinces, but we also represent the broader ambition in South Africa of a master plan, which we are very grateful to partner with ESA, the presidency, and Sasol, which is world renowned for their competence in the hydrogen space. Pertinent is the benefit that we will see for the globe in terms of the just transition process, global exports that we definitely can assist in this global shortfall and the energy crisis. But let's start talking direct benefit, and that's my benefit being in the communities of the Northern Cape, knowing Namibia quite well in Western Cape. If we talk about the Northern Cape economy, our GDP is currently 130 billion per annum. Noting that the green hydrogen and the just energy transition process is big frontier one in South Africa, we can elevate by 2035, bringing on stream the tremendous Sasol investment, which we're very proud of. We can elevate our GDP to 200 billion rand per annum. We'll be creating up to 2035, 25,000 employment opportunities. And the 25,000 employment opportunities is important because we do know as we introduce green hydrogen and the green energy sector, we've got a tremendous fossil base. And we need that to be a process to transition, and we cannot leave stranded human capital out there. So hydrogen in this process is a critical enabler for our economy, for investment, but also for our social cohesion in terms of livelihoods for our people. And on a provincial level, on a project recipient level of project implementation, green hydrogen is absolutely a saving grace at this stage, and also lifting our economy and our social cohesion towards a better life and accommodating the decline in the fossil industry to follow.
Thank you so much. The timing is really key. Juan Pablo, can I invite you to share your perspective?
Thank you. First, many thanks for the invitation, and I'm really happy to be here, and also congratulate the government of South Africa for the efforts that they have put together to have the hydrogen roadmap. Now, I think the question for me is quite easy because everyone has already said what I had in mind. I just want to wrap up the different ideas on the beneficiaries. As a UN organization for industrial development, we look at industry, but that's not the only benefit that we see with the hydrogen. Different beneficiaries, direct or indirect, have been already mentioned. I just want to make the connection with the SDGs. The SDGs, we have the Sustainable Development Goals, and we can cluster these goals into 3 key areas, actually 5 key areas. The people, the planet, and the prosperity. And the different colleagues here have mentioned the benefits for the society, which is very important, and we should not leave that as a second part. It is very important that all these initiatives take a balanced approach on the prosperity, which we talk about, the economic prosperity, the job creation, that is also a prosperity, but it's also a social. And the job creation also touch on another of the P's of the people, planet, prosperity is the peace, bringing peace. A person who has a stable job is most likely to live in peace. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I think the dignity that comes with jobs and that we require as humans. So thank you all for clarifying these many tangible benefits. Priscilla, I wanted to ask if you would add one layer, which is about bringing affordable energy products to South Africa. If you wanted to add on that now, or you can bring it in later. Oh. And so then, Stefan, can we come to you? Because we appreciate you being here with us virtually. KfW has created a large fund for green hydro. Can you tell us a little bit more? Who is it for? What are you trying to get out of it? But also, what is one of the challenges you see in reaching the goals of that fund?
Thank you. Can you hear me?
We can hear you well. Thank you.
Very good. Well, thank you, first of all, to invite me for this panel. Unfortunately, I cannot be there with you in person, but I'm looking forward to the Green Hydrogen Summit in Cape Town by the end of the month, which I hope I can see you all in person. KfW, the group, I have to say, or I can say, is very engaged from now since several years also in looking into ways how to support the green hydrogen industry. And we are well aware of the potential in South Africa that with your endowment, you are suited well to be a global a global important stakeholder in this area. So from last year on, we started to identify projects together with our partners, the Industrial Development Corporation, in coordination also with Mosopa's team, the presidency, and just to identify key catalytic projects. That's one thing, but we know that investment and the amount to support and to bring these projects to bankability, there is more needed. So we are also looking forward tomorrow to the event that we launch a big fund on a global stage, a P2X fund, which we really can also bring the financial support to another level. So as a key, I think what we can bring in as a KfW Development Bank is, first of all, with our instrument, to reduce some of the costs, not only in implementation, but also in development phase. We see that this catalytic project, they need some support in the feasibility stage to really fasten up the process to bankability, but also then implementation phase to reduce some of the costs to make them more cost or competitive with other areas, but not only in exporting, also in importing. I think it's important to establish local use. So knowing that and bringing also environmental and social risk perspective into it, I think that's something we can bring in. And these are some key factors we see which are crucial, but we see a lot of potential in South Africa, a lot of experienced project developers already having develop these projects to a big extent. We have with Industrial Development Corporation a good partner also, where we are looking forward to cooperate.
Thank you so much, Stefan. Mosopa, can I come back to you, please? I mean, the government really holds the key to coordinating and making sure that the needed infrastructure and these plans get implemented. And I know we have a lot of government in the room today. Can you tell us a little bit about how you aim to implement the needed infrastructure, the regulation that's needed to make this all happen, and the skills development that will be required to go along with it? It's a big agenda, and tell us what's first on your mind.
I think the first thing to mention is that South Africa, unlike many other countries, has a long history in green hydrogen. Our Department of Science and Innovation has been researching hydrogen and developing new innovations and technology since 2007. So in that sense, we're working off of a very strong base built over many years. As Priscilla has also said, we also have the inherent advantage that we have major industrial players in the country that have the potential to transition from gray hydrogen to green hydrogen using embedded infrastructure, knowledge and capability. And that also gives us then the potential to begin to produce green hydrogen as early as next year, whereas other countries are working from a greenfield basis. So it's important to understand that fundamental. But as you say, the sort of new frontier of green hydrogen is much more complex. We have potential for industrialization, which draws in the likes of our Department of Trade, Industry and Competition. We have the knowledge and skills element from our Department of Higher Education. We have the potential to commercialize IP developed through the likes of our Department of Science and Innovation. You require, like you're saying, the development of greenfield infrastructure, from ports or port upgrades to transmission infrastructure to desalination plants, et cetera, et cetera. So you have the likes of Transnet and TNPA being involved, our Department of Public Enterprise, et cetera, et cetera. I could go on. I think what we've realized from a South Africa perspective is that what is needed is some element of coordination and collaboration to happen. And that is fundamentally the role that the presidency is playing. So we understand the individual policy mandates of our respective ministries, but there's this element of, first of all, trying to capture a first mover advantage. Because in order to be able to capture this potential of this market, there needs to be demonstrable projects in the ground supplying sort of local and international markets by 2030. That means you have to help to secure PPAs and offtakes. You need to be able to secure electrolyzer capacity and all of these sort of elements that are required to be able to do this. So for us, the fulcrum, the sort of foundation from which we're building this is in assisting the private sector in delivering tangible projects, because that's the point at which all of these other things, which can be very sort of ethereal, sort of land in a very hard and sharp way. And I'll follow that up with a thing that Hendrik said, which is we see the provinces being the sharp end of the spear in this regard. So where does the sort of investment promotion happen? The hand holding from concept through pre-feasibility to financial close is a journey that investors must walk with someone. And hence we sort of also see provinces playing a major role in this, whether it's in the Northern Cape or the Western Cape and the Eastern Cape. And I was also saying to Priscilla, as we are just starting the session, we then also see the translation of national strategies by provinces into provincial strategies. So the offering from the Northern Cape is and should be different from the Western Cape, is and should be different from the Eastern Cape, is and should be different from Gauteng, and their ability to be able to express this and quantify it for investors to understand what their unique offering is, I think is an important element that we see developing. The Northern Cape led by developing their Northern Cape Green Hydrogen Strategy, which was launched at COP last year. And that was seismic. It was maybe lost in the euphoria around the JETP announcement, but it was the first sort of government endorsed strategy that spoke to these new elements of the hydrogen economy in terms of its ability to decarbonize hard to abate sectors and for it to be a tradable commodity for export. And we anticipate and see sort of more such strategies happening. Gauteng talking about domestic decarbonization and what that means for them, etc.
Yeah, thank you so much. And so Henrik, that's a great segue back to you in terms of you have this vision to develop renewable energies to create this green hydrogen hub. To implement this, what interventions will come from you in the Northern Cape, the government, and what interventions or actions do you need from the other players to make it a reality? If you could give us a few concrete examples, would be great.
Absolutely. I think firstly for us is that I first want to go back to track record. It's not that we are starting afresh. We are moving into a new investment with existing operators, global operators with 70 years experience, which is the Lighthouse Investors. We're not taking any stabs in the dark. We're doing it empirically correct. The methodology that we are currently following is we are literally honing in on the pre-feasibility. Next year, end of next year, we will have the feasibility. And critical from this process was that we didn't go out to the platform making commitments, but we went out with a strategy which we now foundationally putting into perspective to say, to start green hydrogen, what is the critical infrastructure? What is the critical value chain? And we know that 60% of the value chain is renewable energy. Renewable energy, at the end of the day, needs land access. It needs utmost perfection in terms of layout, in terms of radiation and wind. And it needs to supplement in a ratio, depending on the mobility of inner and outer battery limit, anything from 30 to 40% balance to reduce. So we can offer investor then access to 60% of the input requirement with exposure to the end of the day renewable energy, which we now can confirm. One. Number two is critical is the connectivity between that renewable energy and then your electrolyzer capacity. And that again is why we complement, like Masopa mentioned, the DTIC coming in with a special economic zone, 30,000 hectares of special economic zone, which we then can basically locate industry at the end of the day, which must benchmark with global renowned infrastructure. The essence of the SEZ is access to world standard infrastructure. production capacity, inner battery limit, and then the cohesion of the value chain. What is the auxiliary services? What do we do with our electrolyzer maintenance? What do we do with panel and windmill assembly? And that is all co-located within that. Critical though is that it also adds on to logistics, because needless to say that the essence of the Northern Cape strategy within the South African context is an export orientation by initiation. So with initiation, we're focusing now on a dedicated Boegoeberg Depot port. You will see that that RFQ has been issued by Transnet, and we're moving towards 2026, 2028 with a dedicated green port. It's not going to be a decarbonized port, it's going to be a green port. And I think those are the essences that we're putting together, like Masopa has said. So from the DTIC, the regulatory framework comes into play. From the infrastructure side, then again, this is we put all the mobilities of corporate governance, housing, roads and public works, the South African SANRAL, Transnet into play. And then last but not least is then also interfacing with the South African context. So facilitating that is infrastructure of world standard, dedicated industrial zone, dedicated logistics, and we're all doing it pristine condition, thereby the World Bank study currently for bunkering fuels, like Madam Belani has just mentioned. This is showing to us that globally the interest is there, the commitment is there, and the surety is there that we will deliver on that.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the example of the green port. It's fantastic. I would love to bring you back in, Priscilla. You've been very patient with us. I don't know if you wanted to complement anything that you've heard so far, or if you also wanted to pick up on what Stefan was talking about, the issue of financing and how you're thinking about financing your own ambitious strategy, what partners you need, and how that ties in with the other actors here.
Perhaps 3 points to add, just to complement first what both Masopa and Hendrik have said. Our strategy as Sasol is customer-centric strategy. It's really premised on listening to our customer needs, analyzing them, and understanding how we're going to help them to achieve their ambitions going forward. So when you look at the climate border tax adjustment coming out, is South Africa going to be competitive going into the future? And part of that then is what is also energizing us to be able to incubate local demand, because we understand that the cost of hydrogen is going to be important for the hard to abate industries, whether it's steel or whether it's heavy duty transportation. So how do we work together as an ecosystem jointly with government to ensure that we don't end up with redundant plants, and we can decarbonize those, including ourselves, going into the future? So that's one element of this. Then, of course, as Masopa has said, that demand that will build into post-2030 at scale and become more competitive as technology and learnings are starting to reduce will help us in the future to build pipelines to bring hydrogen inland for Sasol and for other heavy, the hard to abate industries. So that for us is a common vision that anchors South Africa going forward. Having said that, I think it's also important that we recognize that South Africa has the biggest unemployment rate. At the same time, part of that is the youth. And as we're discussing earlier on with Pablo, the issues of social imperatives are quite important. So how do we take the communities that are currently excluded from the economic justice to be part of that, including women, of course? So if we do this properly, we have to make sure that the policies and the procedures are inclusive and at the heart of that, people-centric as well. So coming back to the issue of funding, I think this for us is very important. We are really encouraged by the Just Energy Transition Plan. But at the same time, we do recognize that the imperatives and the needs are big. And what we are working closely with government, which we want to push our global partners on as well, is we have to come with integrated, innovative solutions. It cannot be the historical funding of putting a burden alone on the fiscus, and sovereign independence is important. To do that, we have to enable the private sector to participate competitively. We know that one of the limitations for South Africa and other regions, African regions to participate is cost of capital, because there's a risk factor compared to some of the geographies that are quite developed. So how do we create offtake elements to be able to ensure that there's contract for differentials, because there's going to be a premium required when you export green ammonia. So how do we make sure that though all of these partners with South Africa are putting platforms where we can competitively bid, where we can competitively conclude the offtakes? Because once you do that, we get funding at scale. And then there's grant funding on the risk front to be able to do the feasibilities and the and studies that are required. So a combination of these solutions is important. So you look at what US has done with the IRA. They've put a production facility to it. We can't afford that, but a demand facility for these developing countries is going to be paramount. And we're hoping that through this COP27, that commitment to forge that for the next year is going to be quite important.
Thank you so much, Priscilla. I would love to turn to our audience now. I know at COP, there's not a lot of chances for the audience to engage with the speakers, but we want to invite you. So if you could raise your hand and you can share a question or a reflection that you're having at this moment, or something you'd like to hear more about. So if you could raise a hand, I'd love to hear from 2 or 3 people, because really we're talking about how much this has to be everybody involved together. Can you run the mic for me? Thank you so much. We have 2 right in here, right? We've got 3 in a row. That's the perfect row. You're all going to get a star after this. Thank you. Please introduce yourself, and if you could intervene in about 60 seconds, keep it short. Thank you.
Good day, everyone. My name is Thandokazi from Eastern Cape. Actually, mine is a comment, not a question. From the grassroots of an NGO called #Let'sLiveGreen. I'm kind of worried that green hydrogen is really this big. We've done an investigation searching about this green hydrogen, and no one yet has come to our area to educate us about it. We're very concerned about the electrolysis that is happening around the green hydrogen, right? Now, my worry is, when are you coming to the Eastern Cape, especially the Gqeberha area, to educate us more about the green hydrogen? And also, how are we going to benefit from it as the civil society? Remember, many technologies has come by to our area, and we've been promised jobs, yet the jobs that you're talking about is only for the 6-month contract, not the sustainable jobs. So I'm really concerned about the area that I live in, because it's going to affect us either way. I think that's about it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate that. Please, sir.
Good morning. My name is Tembisile Salman from the New Development Bank. I think my question, I think my question just comes from the fact that when I look at the many projects that are being touted in South Africa are largely export-driven projects. And I think Priscilla touched on it, some of the challenges that it takes to compete internationally. And I also want to recognize that there are some initiatives locally, for instance, the likes of ArcelorMittal to decarbonize those, the likes of ArcelorMittal, and that's probably the low-hanging fruit. But I just wanted to get a sense of what are the challenges that you see in creating a local industry. I mean, we've touched on unemployment in the local economy, and I think this for me is quite exciting, even more than the renewables path that we've taken, because it's got such a potential in decarbonizing the industry, but also creating the jobs that we require. What are those challenges? I mean, whether it's financing, regulatory, policy making that you see in helping South Africa, grow the industry itself locally and upscaling that to the extent of the international market that we seek to participate in. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Hi there, it's Dave Bryant. I'm a member of Parliament from South Africa. Really exciting discussion. I think this is probably the most exciting discussion that I've been to so far at COP27, hearing about our capacity and ability to leverage off this really, really important potential asset for us going forward. And it's also great to see groups like Sasol being part of the conversation, having an adult conversation around this and not simply demonizing entities that work in the fossil fuel space, bringing in role players in a pragmatic way. I think my question is in particular, not only with green hydrogen, but also with green steel. How is both the presidency and then also from a provincial level, what are some of the ways that we can cut the red tape and the bureaucracy that surrounds a lot of the potential investment? And I know that's tend to be a stumbling block for us in South Africa. What are some of the ways that the presidency and provinces in particular can reduce that red tape so that we can really start to get this underway as soon as as quickly as possible to benefit our people? Thanks.
Thank you so much. Boy, you all are making my job easy. These are the best questions. Can we start with when are local people going to get educated? And I'm inviting the different people on the panel because actually you all have a role to play in this. Who would like to start? Yeah, we'll hear from Juan Pablo first, and then.
Yes. Well, more particular to the challenges that South Africa, I think the experts here would be more accurate in saying, but what we see from other initiatives is.
Sorry, you're answering the question about the challenges?
About the challenges.
Okay, I was gonna go to education first, but please begin. I just want to clarify for the audience because I misled them. You talk about the challenges and then we'll go to the education. Thanks.
Okay, I mean, one of the challenges is the red tape, as it was just mentioned. Of course, there's challenges to start the flow going to investment into identify off-takers and prepare all the value chain. And in each of the links of the value chain, there are different challenges. And we can see the dimensions of the challenges as in policy, as a regulatory, as a skills development. There's a different skills required at each part of the value chain. If one of these parts is not functioning, the next part will not function. So it is a collaborative effort. And as it was mentioned, there are many ministries and industries that needs to be aligned into making the road easier, not only for the investments to come, but for the investments to remain. And this is innovation, education, and I'll leave that more detail for my colleagues.
So from there, why don't we build on challenges and cutting red tape because they are so related? I'd love to hear from you, and then we'll come back to educating local communities. Thank you.
I'll try and sort of give my little perspective on each of them, maybe in the order in which they were asked.
And then actually, I'm going to ask each of you to give one idea on how we can cut red tape. So now you have time to think of it while you're talking, please.
Okay. So the first one in terms of when will we get to the likes of the Eastern Cape and educate people around the potential of green hydrogen. I think it's also important to understand sort of this evolution or sort of this new phase of green hydrogen has happened also in a time when we found ourselves in the midst of the COVID pandemic. So the ability to be able to sort of go out and engage communities and sort of explain in sort of real terms what this could mean to them has been limited, you know, by technology barriers and others that exist. It is also in recognition of the fact that South Africa has not done as good a job as other countries and other territories that are competing on this global stage in terms of selling the South African story as a major green hydrogen production hub, and also domestically to you know, different regions around what this could mean to them. So we do recognize that. One way in which we are looking to address this is we will be hosting the inaugural South African Green Hydrogen Summit at the end of this year. It probably sort of fits in a plethora of green hydrogen summits that exist at the moment, but this will be the first government-sponsored and anchored summit on green hydrogen, and will really be a platform for government and partners to articulate what this means from a policy perspective, where we see challenges, and how we are looking to address those for both the domestic and international markets. So that's the first one. The second question in terms of challenges, there are many. So it is also important to understand that this is a nascent sector, and competition for the limited amount of premium demand that exists is at an international level. So where we really sort of see opportunities and the potential for government and business to collaborate is to leverage off of our sort of strong international ties in order to be able to assist projects in securing offtake agreements and PPAs, which is one of the first sort of elements that sort of moves you from concept to pre-feasibility and ultimately to a bankable project. You know, we do understand that there's a lot of aggregate demand, different countries talking about what their transitions could look like and what that would mean in terms of green hydrogen demand. But no banker is going to bank your project based on aggregate demand. It's on the strength of the individual PPA. So in that sense, we are working with and looking to announce an MOU between ourselves and the Netherlands, specific to green hydrogen, looking to support sort of multiple areas, but from a project perspective, that element of government to government linkage, which allows the B2B linkage on offtakes, as well as additional funding for project preparation. We're doing the same with the German government and are in discussions with multiple such governments. So from a government perspective, how can we create those elements of collaboration at a government to government level that then enable the B2B? And then on the last one.
Can I stop you there? Because I want to come back to the last one, but I'd love to bring in Stefan, if that's all right, on sort of how the different organizations internationally are working with each other, both in terms of pre-feasibility, bankability, as well as, you know, offtake agreements. And certainly, you know, coming from the IFC, that's something that we're also very concerned about, is how to make these projects bankable and how can we bring in blended finance or help with any kind of technical support for pre-feasibility phase. Stefan, what's your perspective? And if you could prioritize for me, you know, what's the one thing that you think we should all be focused on first in that space?
Very difficult question, because indeed, was also mentioned, it's very complex because it's a developing market, it's a nascent market globally on demand side, but also on the supply side. So I think from a financial viability, the offtake agreements are key. And we see also that projects already manage to get PPAs, long-term PPAs, but these are rare. So instruments, for example, like H2 Global, Contract for Difference, to build that bridge to offtake, I think that is a key. As I said, also establishing also business opportunities in the country to balancing the demand, not only looking for export, but the local use of green hydrogen is also imperative. And was also mentioned, I think we see that in Germany, this transformation is huge. So have an early engagement with communities that they also understand the benefit out of it. Make sure that they know that these benefits are not only on the corporate level, but it's also for the community level, I think. And investing early in skill development, I think these are some key which really helps to establish such a market. But it's complex, and I think bankability, mobilizing the private capital is essential. So looking into risks, identifying these risks, and then develop some innovative instruments with guarantees also, for example. I think this is something we are keen to cooperate together with others.
Thank you so much, Stefan. We had talked about inviting each of you to share one hack, one idea that you think would help cut through red tape. Can I ask each of you for one idea? Can we start with you, Henrik? It can be very small. Sometimes small is beautiful.
I think just from that side, this is the first point that I want to make is what Masopa mentioned is on the South African scenario is the integration component, because there's a plethora of areas of integration which is required with stakeholders. So from the South African side, I really want to compliment ESA with the work done, but that integration is important. If I may say, because I'm having the privilege to implement a project with Sasol, is start your project preparation early. I think our colleagues just mentioned early on people, planet, and prosperity. As South Africa, we remain responsible in terms of NEMA. One of your biggest red tape, or two big red tapes in South Africa, remains your environmental impact analysis, your bio offset agreement, and then your spatial integration. Pity is we cannot cut that short. Yes, we are registering now this month, SIP registration, Bucco Bay with Sasol. The harbor has been. It does not denounce the responsibility that we've got. We must still comply, but it reduced the timelines. So 2 recommendations: integrate. 1, 2, sorry to say, there is compliance, but let's start with that early enough. If we make a mistake, the Burton bat study in South Africa, 2 years. I know everybody's going to throw me with guano for that. You have to do it, because if we ruin that bird and that bat life, we can never return to it. So those 2 elements, my advice. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Who would want to answer that?
Yeah, thank you. I would emphasize the coordination on the permits and the licensing, and coming to this, the importance of standards, because this is an incipient industry. There's a currently discussion, what is green hydrogen? So if we don't agree between the countries, between the industry, what do we call green hydrogen? We will have a bottleneck sometime in the near future. So it is very important that we all contribute and to the discussions of the standards, the countries that are putting in place these projects, and there is an informed decision on how to go with standards, because many industries or many people are maybe hydrogen is on a hype now, and we need to be very careful on the information that we get, and just stress again the collaboration for standards development.
Thank you. Priscilla, please add.
I think the other part is that this transformation is significant. We should not underestimate the skills and competencies required at large scale going forward. So we need an integrated skills development plan. I just still worry that we've got very fragmented approaches. We have cities that are probably focusing on different skill sets. The higher education skills are not yet adaptive at scale to the new requirements. So our challenge, and also to business through the NBI, but also through the presidency, is how do we mobilize unlimited resources to accelerate skills development at pace?
Can you, Masopa, can you add to that? Because I think this part about skills development is also critical to answer our question about how are we educating and raising awareness locally? And that's all part of the same spectrum. And I totally hear you when you say it's been so difficult over the last 3 years to mobilize and visit people physically. What are some of the things that we can do to spread the word, to make sure that locally people understand the opportunity for them and how they might move into that, you know, skilling up space?
Sure. I think it's probably worth saying, though, that the impact of green hydrogen is not going to be felt uniformly throughout the country, so that we don't raise an expectation that...
Just say that again, so everyone heard.
Yeah, so the impact of green hydrogen is not going to be felt uniformly throughout the country.
Nor immediately.
Or immediately, you know. So, you know, we see large scale projects emerging. They will locate themselves close to where the resources, and in this case, it's renewable energy. We will see sort of the potential for attraction of ecosystem companies that can then support that close to where the resources. So hence our initial strategy when it came out was the Northern Cape in response to that. From a border decarbonization story, and in response to challenges and potential hurdles like tariff border adjustments and others, it is important to then decarbonize the rest of industry and the rest of the country. But I don't think it would be sort of realistic to expect that this will directly touch everybody in every village in every part of the country. What we do expect, though, is that from a resource perspective, there will be elements where we have the opportunity now with the scale that green hydrogen brings to bring in larger elements of localization and local production. So The South Africa commercialization strategy produced by DTIC is in the process of being approved through cabinet processes, and hopefully will be approved by the end of this month. And we'll talk in sort of real terms around where we see industrial opportunities stemming from this, and the potential of that to then have a broader impact. To your skills question, DSI and the Department of Higher Education has done a detailed study on the preparation of the country from a skills perspective in response to the green hydrogen economy. So it is something that we have been considering and looking at. It does build off of the sort of significant knowledge base that is already existing in South Africa in terms of the production and handling of chemicals and that engineering element. But there is a detailed study that has been done by DSI from the skills perspective. If I could just mention one or two other things, I know we're sort of running out of time. It is worth expanding on what Hendrik said, is that there is a process allowed in South Africa's legislation under the Infrastructure Development Act, which allows for the fast tracking of what are called strategic integrated projects, or SIPs for short. So this is a process where projects that are of a significant scale, either on a standalone basis or as a program like Green Hydrogen have the ability to be gazetted as a strategic project or program for the country, and then allows for the reduction in time for the decision elements around regulatory elements like environmental impact assessments, water use licenses, etc. Because in many cases, the elongation of that process brings in an additional element of risk for developers. So what this allows is for the fast tracking. So reducing that decision-making process from sort of up to 18 months down to 59 days.
Fantastic.
So that's something that already exists and is an important element.
Wonderful. I love that we're talking about fast tracking, and I'm about to fast track the final closure of this session. You all have been fantastic. I'd like to ask each of you experts, you could each be doing a masterclass in this space. I'm sorry it was so short. I'm sure you all walked by the huge board that says act now, right? This COP is supposed to be about action. I'd like to ask each of you to share with us just one action that you personally, individually will take next week when you return to your office from COP. Just one action, and it can be small, it doesn't have to be grand. Who wants to go first? One action. Stefan, I'm coming to you because you have the benefit of sitting comfortably without so much noise around. Give us one very specific action, Stefan, and then I'm coming to you next, Hendrik.
My action, we are supporting currently Transnet in developing a green hydrogen strategy. So that is a group with the support of consultants, and that is something I would like to intensify the discussion. So that's something which is important.
All right,
for
so
me
you're
for the
on the
next
hook
weeks.
for that, Stefan. We're going to come back to you in a couple of weeks and check on how that's going. Thank you. In one sentence, one action.
People and planet. That made such an impression on mine because that will bring us then to prosperity. And I think all our project bases and our elements is to go and review and make sure that we elevate people and planet again. Thank
Review
you.
all projects for people and planet. I love
Yeah.
that. Juan Pablo.
Well, one action, I have a huge task list when I return to Vienna. But I think one very important part that we're starting to do with the government of South Africa is to support the government into how to monitor and evaluate the strategy of green hydrogen. What are the best practices out there in the world? There are not many, but we're going to work on that.
Thank you so much. Support the government on that. Thanks. Priscilla.
Taking a lead from Pablo, I am committing to work very closely with the presidency on landing the offtake framework.
Landing the offtake. Fantastic, Priscilla. Masopa, the last word is to you, sir.
Yeah, so we, like I mentioned, are holding a South Africa Green Hydrogen Summit at the end of the month. So we'll continue to sort of work in the background for the preparation of that. The other thing that we haven't spoken about today at all is the potential for greater regional and continental collaboration. Because when we talk standards and things, most of those come from sources of demand. So there's been very little supply side coordination, and I think there's significant opportunity for that. And that's something that we'll be highlighting in our session later today.
Excellent. So we can come to that session to hear more. Thank you so much. And I just want to bring it back to my personal action is reminding all of us in our work that educating communities is not over-promising to them. And it doesn't mean that we're telling them that they're going to have some opportunity that's not realistic, but making sure that they know just reasonably what is happening in the society around them. So I want to thank you all so much for your insights, your ingenuity, and also your patience with me and the noise around us. But it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Shape the follow meeting. Target your colleagues as well.
I think I want to stand for the start. Could I ask everybody who's attending the next event to take their seats, please? Bhavna? Okay. Bhavna, you. Okay. Should I go for it? Okay, good afternoon, good morning. It is afternoon. Good afternoon good afternoon all, and also good afternoon to our live streamed audience who are dialing in from all over the world, a lot from South Africa, but from other places as well. My name is Joanne Yawich. I am the Chief Executive of the National Business Initiative. And okay, I'm going to be chairing today's event. It gives me, I can't tell you how much pleasure and pride I have in being able to have this event at this COP. Today we are looking at the outcome of the Climate Pathways and Just Transition for South Africa project that has been run by the NBI with support from BUSA and Boston Consulting Group over now almost 2.5 years. And there are many people in this room who've spent many hours giving their wisdom and guidance to this project. And in the process, I think, have begun to see what a solid evidence base means in relation to climate change, and how asking a hypothetical question, which is where we started. We started off by saying, would it be possible for the South African economy to reach net zero by 2050? That was the guiding question around this work. And having dissected the economy sector by sector and engaged with a very wide range of stakeholders, I think we reached a conclusion that yes, it can. And I think not only did we reach a conclusion that yes, it can, but I think we have solid proof of concept, and in that process have been able, I think, to make a very big impact in relation to business in South Africa. So this project, and I'm going to introduce the panel in a minute, was run and given oversight by a group of around 30 CEO champions. 2 are on the platform, and I really want to thank the chief executives of the companies that have participated in their project for their extraordinary commitment to it, for their own time over a period of 2.5 years, as well as for the time of their teams. And Luca will talk a little bit more about the process that we went through. So I'm very delighted to introduce on this panel, Andre de Ruyter, the CEO of Eskom, Dr. Crispian Olver, the Executive Director of the Presidential Climate Commission, Nyimpini Mabunda from the CEO of General Electric in South Africa, and Luca Shomonte from BCG, with whom we've walked a long journey. And I'd like to then hand over to Luca. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Joanne. Just a few words on behalf of BCG. I would like to thank you, Joanne, for the outstanding leadership throughout this journey, and the full NBI team for the fantastic teaming that we had over this journey. I also would like to thank the 30 CEO champions, just the number, 30 CEOs, but also the commitment of this group during this work, and also their teams that have given so many hours in this work. So really, thank you very much. Today is an important day, as you said, Joanne. It's actually the conclusion of more than 2 years of work. And we believe that we have, for the first time, a holistic net zero plan for the country. Not a sector-based plan for, let's say, only the energy sector, but holistic for the entire economy, including energy, but also transport, industry, agriculture. So a comprehensive plan for the country. The plan is backed by rigorous modeling, including the gold standard modeling tool Plexos. And I think very few countries have actually done that. It's also based on a very extensive, can go to the next page, a very extensive stakeholder engagement, hundreds of hours of workshops with hundreds of stakeholders. And I believe South Africa is ahead. And there is a reason why South Africa got among developing countries the first JETP last year, opening the way for other countries, really showing the way. If today is the conclusion of this work, it's also the beginning of the implementation journey. And there is no better place to kick off the implementation that this COP27 here in Egypt. It is the position as the COP of implementation. And I think now all efforts have to go into implementation. We have a pathway. We have an investment plan, the JETP investment plan. We have an initial pipeline of projects. We have committed financing, not enough, but we have some committed financing to get started. So really now is the time to unlock that finance, start building the infrastructure at an unprecedented scale and speed. We're talking about 6 to 7 gigawatts per year. And also succeeding in this massive reskilling journey that we need to go through in this journey. And maybe just one last word. We thought that this platform with these 30 CEOs has been incredibly effective in this throughout this study. And we believe it's useful to keep it and maintain it as well through the implementation journey. So we would like to keep that to help drive alignment across the private sector, as well as help remove obstacles along the way. With that, I'll hand over to Retumetse for the presentation.
So thank you very much, Luca. And we can go ahead to the next slide just to get a sense of the starting context for South Africa. And this has been, I think, discussed quite extensively over a number of panels and sessions during this conference. So as a starting point, I think we can fully appreciate the degree to which the transition also involves a high level of risk in key sectors. So the mining sector in particular is at high risk of losing jobs as part of this transition. And you can see from the map that we've put up some of those regions that are most vulnerable in terms of coal mining and the PGMs complex. But we also note that it's not just a localized risk that we face in this particular sector, but that the workers that are located in the sector are part of a broader value chain and support a high degree of dependence. So the issue of risk goes beyond, I think, the localized kind of jobs perspective, but we understand that it ramifies into different parts of society through the dependents that are supported. But the other part of this kind of risk that we're facing is not just at the jobs front, but it's a recognition that South Africa's economy is highly exposed. And if we do nothing, we put at risk up to 20% of our exports. We know that there are significant changes that are driven by climate change that are taking place in our key markets, our key export markets. And so not being able to respond and act in a proactive way to some of these risks places a high degree of our economic potential at risk as well. So this is something that we do need to consider as we transition. So we've understood the degree to which our economy is at risk and some of those implications, I think, beyond just the workplace. And I think it speaks to the fact that ensuring that a just transition takes place is a key part, is a critical part of how we do this transition and how we manage and put in place the various building blocks. Key to those are this element of justice and the ways in which we understand it, from procedural justice, distributive justice, as well as restorative justice, which is also reflected in the PCC Just Transition Framework. And part of our work has been to, I think, socialize, but also to get a high degree of support from business that these are a critical part of how the transition must occur and how these need to be translated into demonstrable action in these various areas. So we're talking about job creation, training and capacitation, how we consider geographic and cultural dislocation, among others. And I think fundamentally just speaking to the fact that the justness of the transition is at the foundation of how we will undertake this change as a country. I'm happy to hand over now to Steve, who's going to give us some insight into the key findings of the work that we've done thus far.
Thanks. Morning, everybody. Afternoon, as Joanne pointed out earlier. So between Ritsumitsi, Kesh, and myself, we kind of led the technical work for this team, and at one stage spent more time with each other than we did with our partners. So we got to know each other rather well. So we're going to run through the high-level detail, and I'm going to start off on the next slide and just point out the magnitude of the task. And so these are really the sectors and the contribution each sector makes towards the total emissions that we can emit between now and 2050. And that's the carbon budget. And so we have to think about that quite carefully, because most of the academic fair share views of a carbon budget get South Africa to somewhere between 7 and 9 gigatons. And our study came up with a view of 9 gigatons. So we're on the top end of that spectrum. But even to get to the top end, we have to do some pretty extreme things. So the power sector, 3.5 gigatons to 4.5 gigatons. And in order to get into that range, we have to close all power plants by 2035. We have to build 6 gigawatts to 8 gigawatts of renewables every year between now and 2050. These are significant changes. To get to the transport goal, we have to get at 750,000 electric vehicles on the road by 2030, total electrification after that. In food agriculture, we have to get 30% of South Africans onto sustainable diets by 2030. And that is perhaps the toughest one. I spoke at a COP several years ago, and I said South Africans will give up coal before we give up meat. And so these are kinds of the challenges that we face, and every sector faces similar daunting tasks. And so again, this is something we have to be very, very urgent about, and the systemic changes are really quite large. But as Joanne said earlier, this is possible. These are things that we can do. There's nothing in here that's so far out of imagination that it's impossible to do. It is something that is really quite feasible. Next slide, please. And on that feasible point, 60% of all of our reductions are enabled by switching to renewables. Renewables is everything. That is the thing that we have to drive, certainly in the short to medium term. It doesn't mean that we can neglect other things. We still have to get 750,000 vehicles on the road, which means that, you know, if you think about that, South Africa sells about 400,000 to 500,000 vehicles a year. So by 2027, 60% of those vehicles have to be EVs. That gives us 5 years to kind of transition the sector. But thinking about renewables, most of that change is happening in renewables. And you know, thinking about that first bar of all the emissions reductions that are possible, we put renewables and other mature technical levers together. 70% of the reductions we need are available with technology we have today. Right, that's how possible this is. The really, you know, the stuff that we have to think about, adoption of hydrogen and so on, that's coming further down the line. Let's get the stuff that we know how to do now, and we get 70% of the way. Next slide, please. So these are kind of the 10 high-level thoughts that came out of the study. And across all of the sectors, these are the levers we have to pull and the levers that have the most influence. The first one, enable the rollout of renewables through investment in the grid. Andre, I'm sure we'll talk on this more, but if we don't get the grid right, we can't enable all of these things. So investing in the grid is kind of central to the strategy. Second point, let's roll out those renewables. We've mentioned six gigawatts needed now if we're just going to transition power. We need 8 gigawatts if we're going to transition to electric vehicles. We need 12 gigawatts once we start to get to hydrogen. So 6 is what we need now. We're ramping up progressively as time goes by. And I see some of the financiers in the room wincing, and that's kind of is how it is. Third point, leveraging South Africa's structural advantages on green hydrogen. This is something we can do. We're amongst the most competitive nations in the world, and it's a big technology that we need in order to particularly transition the last mile of emissions. Reverse the declining use of rail. We need to shift 20% of goods and passengers onto rail in the next decade or so. We need to identify urban sprawls. This is a big issue. A lot of the other levers for decarbonization are enabled by densification, right? If we can make cities denser, people will use more public transport. They use less resources living in their space. And this is the one that kind of worries me the most because it's so behavioral. We can control a lot of these other issues using policy measures that we already know, but this kind of behavioral change of having mixed use, mixed income settlements is really quite challenging and something that people are going to be reluctant to do. Electrifying road transport, we've talked about, and Kesh will talk about in more detail. We have to go electric fast. We need to use the increase of public transport. So the middle class 2-car family, where in South Africa, 2 of those cars are Land Rover Defenders. Those days are gone. Driving a shift to nutrition, I've mentioned this, we have to drive much more plant-based diets, much lower red meat diets. And then heavy manufacturing is key. We need to transition steel and cement in particular. And again, both achievable. And if we're able to combine the lever on hydrogen, the lever of steel and cement, we're able to produce net zero commodities into the market, increasing our competitiveness, as well as increasing our local security. So energy security in the future will become commodity security. Can we get the vanadium to build the batteries? Can we get the steel to build the transmission infrastructure? And so again, those two working together is really good. And then, of course, we need much more targeted and disrupted ways of thinking about international support. And while we're super grateful for the 8.5 billion, and it has enabled South Africa to build the infrastructure that we need for future rounds, there have to be future rounds. And those future rounds have to be much more innovative than they are now. We need to go beyond just crowding in existing measures to start thinking about new instruments and new ways of thinking about finance. So it's kind of the high level levers that we need to pull. And we've got some deep dives on 5 of those. You can see where the stars are on that board. And Kesh is going to provide us with some of that detail.
Thanks, Steve. I think you've done a fantastic job of trying to summarize, the holistic picture of what South Africa needs to do to transition. And I'm glad that after 2 years of working, I finally got you to say the word deep dive on a slide. So that's great. But maybe I'm going to peel back the onion a bit more on some of those key levers, right? And I think the first one I want to start with is the grid. None of this actually happens without a grid almost as a competitive advantage for the country. And so we do have spare capacity on our grid. We do have that today. But we need to build another 30 gigawatts of capacity over and above what's available on the grid today. That represents a huge infrastructure challenge. But it also is going to require more collaboration and innovative commercial constructs to allow this to happen through some sort of public-private partnership model, and also to make sure that we can move at the pace that we need to see the grid evolve at, really, because that is the center of bringing on renewables at scale on the grid. Next slide, please. The next key thing, and it speaks to the scale of challenge that Steve had highlighted earlier. You can see the numbers on the page there, around 6 to 7 gigawatts built every year just to decarbonize the power sector alone. That's before we even get into what we need for hydrogen. For hydrogen, we need another 6 to 12 gigawatts of dedicated capacity to get online. Think about, we've only built sort of 4 to 5 gigawatts over the last 10 years. That presents a huge challenge from thinking about how many skilled laborers we need in the country, how many cranes we need in the country, and making sure we can get all of that orchestrated in a way that enables the infrastructure at the pace and scale we need is going to be a massive challenge. But technically, we think it can be done. Yeah. Next slide, please. The other thing I want to comment on is beyond just the need to decarbonize, we also need to seize the opportunity to ensure just transition by creating new green economic value pools. For South Africa, green hydrogen is going to be one of those. We are structurally advantaged. What we mean by that is we've got really good complementary wind and solar load factors. So they basically together make more than the sum of their parts, right? Which not many countries in the world can do. And we have enough land, and there are huge synergies with solving for water security in the country as well. And so those structural advantages really position us well to capture the green hydrogen opportunity. We think that that can create something like 2.5 million cumulative jobs over the next 30 years. And really the critical thing to get right here is a coordinated approach of supply demand hubs across the country, almost creating an ecosystem as an advantage. And I think the work that the IDC and the hydrogen panel in South Africa are doing and the presidency is just an amazing step in that direction to try and enable that. We go to the next slide. We talked a lot in the previous slides about the power sector and some of the energy opportunities we have. What we talk about here, and Steve mentioned it, is the importance of spatial planning and city densification. So have a look at the pictures on the slide. What you'll see is sort of Copenhagen on the left and Johannesburg on the right. And in Copenhagen, you'll see sort of the red lines represent sort of peaks of population density. And the city is almost orchestrated along transport corridors. So you minimize the number of people movements. It also helps with the circular economy and driving efficiencies in that regard. And as Steve mentioned, as you densify cities, you also get a much easier lever to pull when it comes to sustainable housing, right? Minimizing the number of kilowatts that each person needs to use per day. If you look at Johannesburg on the right, we are set up as an urban sprawl, right? So very low population densities over a very long area. And to try to kind of move to a greener economy with that urban sprawl setup is not really the efficient way to do it. We need to drive more spatial density in our cities. And this is something that will happen in the long term. We're not going to say that this is happening overnight, but it's a critical thing for us and a very efficient lever if you think about the integrated pathway that South Africa can chart. Next slide, please. Now we move on to the transport sector. And what you see here is a view of what we call the car park. So 11 million cars in the car park as of today, right? And in dark blue, you'll see the electric vehicle bar becoming bigger and bigger over time. So the critical thing to know here is that in the car park, there's lots of inertia in the system, right? Cars only are replaced every 12 years. Purchasing decisions are different depending on which consumer you look at. And so the stickiness of the car park is something that is difficult to overcome. Having said that, the purchasing decisions and the things we need to do now still hold true, right? We need about 750,000 electric vehicles on the road by 2030. We need an IC engine ban by 2035. And we need almost 30 to 45,000 charging stations to be rolled out across the country every year for the next 30 years. Again, a huge infrastructure challenge and a commercial challenge as well to make sure that you can orchestrate the right system of partners to make sure that this works. Next slide, please. And fundamentally, what this is going to do is shift the face of the energy mix in South Africa, right? We're going to move from a sort of almost flat demand trajectory for electricity in the country today to something that is growing over time, not just due to GDP growth, but actually because of the electrification of the economy. One of the cool things we did in the study is actually model, how the increase in demand for power in the transport sector, in the heavy manufacturing sector leads to an increase in demand over time, effectively electrifying the economy. So we'll see a shift towards more electricity consumption over time. We think that liquid fuels production will come down and consumption also come down, particularly consumption post-2030. Coal will start to decline post-2030, just in line with the decarbonization dates of the power stations we see. You've got gas sort of playing an intermediate role over time, and then hydrogen really scaling up post-2030, particularly as the sort of local consumption evolves as well. Next slide, please. So all of this is going to cost us about 6 trillion rand, right? About 1 trillion rand is going to be required in the next 10 years. Yeah. And that is just the cost of capital for infrastructure. That excludes the skills development cost and capacitation cost that you see in the JET IP. That accounts for a little bit of the difference as well. Yeah. The important thing to think about here, it's not just about securing the funding. I think the fact that we've got the 8.5 billion now is a step in the right direction. But we really need to get to the level of making sure that the terms of finance are really structured in a way that the projects on the ground can take them. I think we've got a good view of what that pipeline of projects look like today as well. And if we don't have the right terms of finance, getting that funding to flow, if it even from bilateral level down into the projects, is going to be a challenge. And that's where we need to focus when we think about implementation. And maybe the last thing before I hand back to Steve would be just on the next slide. We think that a lot of this funding, the 1 trillion and the 6 trillion in the long term, can be commercially viable, right? If you think about the technologies underneath it. About 560 billion rand of the 1 trillion we need in the first 10 years is going into renewable energy, EV infrastructure, gas to power, and green buildings, right? These are economically viable and proven technologies today. Where we do need concessional finance to come in and play a catalytic role to anchor private sector investment is going to be things like grid infrastructure, again, given the speed of rollout that we need, and green gas ready infrastructure. If we see gas to power there, that gas to power needs to be converted to green gases in the future, right? And the infrastructure we put forward needs to be green gas ready. So we need to make sure that that's resilient to future shocks and that it doesn't become stranded assets. And then lastly, green hydrogen. So the need for concessional finance is going to be massive here. It's not just going to be private sector that can foot the bill for this. The two need to work in collaboration with one another to make sure that we can catalyze the investment needed into the economy to make this a reality. Maybe with that, I'm just going to hand over back to Steve to talk a bit about how risks also shifts through the economy. And Steve, over to you.
Yeah, thanks. You know the kind of people you're talking to, and Kesh used the phrase, one of the cool things we did in the modeling. Yeah, so jumping onto the last slide, when we think about this finance and back to that point 10 in our list of things, thinking about innovative ways to think about finance and risk, that's really what we're thinking about here. Each of these rollouts carries risk in different parts of the economy, and we have to make sure that we allocate that risk appropriately. We cannot expect the government balance sheet to carry all of the risk in this transition. And so we have to find this mix of philanthropic support, of DFI support, of different instruments, private equity, listed equity. We have to think about all of these things working together. And that's really the conversation around thinking about finance blending. And so we have a view in the report that will be released that gives a sense of how we think that risk should be allocated. You'll see that we have to think really down to the scale of who's taking on the execution and the technical risk, who's taking on the commercial risk, who's taking on the forex risk. So if we think about hydrogen as an example, and the numbers change all the time, but when we did the first round of modeling, the weighted average cost of capital that we need to be competitive in hydrogen is about 5.5%. That's less than commercial rates, but it's at the rates that we're seeing in the JETP. This is something that can be done, but of course, at a really huge scale. And we can't do that hydrogen transition with guaranteed offtakes from the government balance sheet. And so the risk needs to be borne somewhere. And so these are the kinds of things that we need to do as a community. And so to make the kind of key point that this project's not over. We've set the starting point, we've set the vision, and now we have to get to the implementation. The CEO champions have to start thinking about really the hard parts. The easy part is done. Who's going to carry the risk? Where's the finance going to come from? How are we going to collaborate? Where are we going to get the technical expertise? And so we welcome all of you to join us on that journey as we move South Africa to a net zero future. And I'm going to hand back to Joanne.
Thank you very much. And thank you to Retametsi, Steve and Kesh. I think that they have done, and their teams have done the most incredible work over the last 2 years and have produced the most incredible PowerPoints and beautiful illustrations of the results of the work. Steve isn't listening. Just paid tribute to your storyline ability, Steve. Thank you. Okay, I'd like to now hand over to, I'm going to give each of our panel just an opportunity to talk a little bit about their experience of the work that we did. And their experience of the CEO Champions engagement, as well as to get a sense of where you see this work going forward. So let me start with you, Andre.
Thanks, Joanne, and good afternoon, everybody. It's really great to see so much interest in this work. I have to pay tribute to Joanne's leadership. I think your ability to herd chief executive cats are that are opinionated, that each have an inflated sense of self-importance and yet get the work done. That's amazing. So well done to Joanne. But I think practically speaking, what we've found to be immensely useful is to have a credible database that we can access, that we can refer to, that we can quote research that actually is based on sound science, sound economics, and sound analysis. And it makes our work so much easier that we have this deep pool of data and analysis that we can bank on to formulate our own views. We don't agree with everything, with all the conclusions, obviously, but I think the catalytic nature of this work should not be underestimated. And it's been absolutely delightful. You know, even though we had meetings run into dinner time and then beyond, but that's the taskmaster that Joanne was, and well done, congratulations.
Thank you very much, Andre, and thank you for your willingness to give up that time to stay the course and to give your guidance. Nyimpini, if you can talk a little bit about the process and your experience.
Thank you very much, Joanne. And maybe just to draw some inspiration and borrow from Cash and Steve, this was a cool project to be involved in. I absolutely have to say. I think kudos to all involved for the leadership and the clarity in the discussion. And I think for me that is quite important because all of us coming from different industries, different background, we all had our opinions, and we needed someone to aggregate the discussion, to marshal us and really create a platform for us to debate. And this has happened. And that, for speaking for myself as GE CEO, it actually gives, it makes it easier for me to discuss and have a conversation with my international principals. Because if it's not just a GE view, but a South Africa view, I think that's credible because they hear the same consistent view from other industries and other players. More importantly, though, is that we operate in an ecosystem, in a value chain. And it's good to have members of the value chain having a common understanding because we need each other. It's an integrated view. And lastly, for me, it was at a personal level, it was also a learning journey because for us, even for us as leaders, a lot of this is new. And to really get engaged and learn, but also share some of the expertise that we might have from our industries, but also from global. In a view, for instance, of GE being a global company, we do have best practice, and to get a platform to really share that, test that, and debate it. But what was very, very useful as I conclude for me is, I suppose, a sigh of relief to know that this is possible, this is feasible. Because without the facts, it's hard to say. And we started off from saying net zero by 2050, South Africa, looking at where we are. But as the team has demonstrated, we have the capabilities. We still have challenges, but we have the technology and so on. So it was very reassuring to say that can be done. And now we need to roll out our sleeves and actually make it work.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that, Nyimpini. Dr. Olva, I wonder, one of the things we did through the course of this project was work quite hard to engage not only with the technical experts from companies, and I see many of you in the room who were involved in the many workshops that were held around the different elements of this work, but we also tried to engage with government, with civil society, and try to understand how we could do this in such a way that the output of this work would go beyond and be useful beyond the business community. So in your capacity as the executive director of the PCC, we'd be interested to hear your take on it.
Yeah, that works. Good afternoon, everyone. So let me add my note of congratulation. This is a hugely significant piece of work. It predated the establishment of the Climate Commission. So, I arrived in my job to find this project already well underway. In fact, starting to draw to conclusion. And it predates the just transition framework that our commission put out there. But in many ways, this study anticipated the social and economic aspects of the transition that we have to take into account. And probably the most, I mean, of all the suite of slides that Retametsi and Steve produced, probably the most consequential, if I had to pick one slide, it was the slide with the cost of inaction. And that hit home to decision makers across the spectrum, including the core economic ministries in government. So, you know, this study was a little bit ahead of its time in that regard. I think it allowed business to come to the table. I mean, once the commission got set up and running, business was able to engage in the commission with an informed position that was, compared to where they'd been previously, far more forward-looking and proactive. And that was very significant. And your work then went on to inform a number of the processes that resulted. So, you know, we as the commission made recommendations on the nationally determined contribution, South Africa's emissions trajectory. And we found consensus fairly easily around that emissions trajectory. And that was informed by your work you know, with this NBI and BCG study. And then more recently, you know, South Africa's ability to get this JET-I investment plan on the table with some very complicated calculations around emissions, investment requirements, jobs impact, where to prioritize the spend. A lot of that was because we built it on the base of this study. So all in all, I think a very, very consequential study.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I want to ask Shamini Harrington to come up. We worked with Business Unity South Africa, and I think importantly for us as South Africans, it was critical not only to have individual companies engaged in this process, but to also have a view from the key industry associations across the country. And Shamini heads the BUSA Environment Committee. And maybe, Shamini, if you could talk a little bit from the perspective of BUSA as our apex business organization, of your experience of the work. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you, Joanne, and thank you to everyone sitting here. I mean, the presentations were phenomenal. It's just telling of the magnitude of this work and the gravitas it has brought in terms of bringing together business. You know, when we start talking about net zero, it's such a daunting situation, particularly within business, hard to abate sectors. And the moment you start putting an evidence base to this, it changes the narrative, especially when you start seeing your role in the transition and how you can affect a change. And this is what this study has done. It's brought together business in a way that was not there before. And Dr. Oliver, you said it perfectly. It was a foundational piece of work that allowed us as a South African business community to rally around a pathway to transition the country. And Joanne, NBI, the BCG team has been phenomenal in allowing us to have the tough conversation. So I look forward to seeing how this work is taken up within policy. And it now allows us to crystallize what are the enablers to get us to net zero quicker and faster, very much with a just transition in mind. How can we do this to grow the economy from both a social and economic perspective? So well done to the team. Let's take it forward.
Thank you very much. We have 15 minutes. I'm wondering if there aren't any questions or comments from the audience. If anybody would like to speak, just put your hand up. We'll give you a mic. Over there, yeah. Okay. And introductions, yeah.
Thank you. My name is Sophie Mkwena from the South African Broadcasting Corporation. I want to get your view. Yesterday, I attended a briefing by the African group, the Ministers of Environmental Affairs. The issue of the just energy transition, it's something that was coined, I think, by South Africa, and South Africa then sold it to the entire continent. There are concerns, particularly from smaller countries, poorer countries, that when you talk about just energy transition, you have to take into consideration that countries are not at the same level. When you take a country like Malawi, CAR, which is literally in a crisis, when you have to adapt that approach to different countries, in your observation, do you think it can be a blanket approach or you have to adjust it? Thank you so much.
Okay, you want to take it, Nimpini?
Yeah, thanks. You mentioned some of my countries. I look after Southern Africa. So Malawi, Zambia, and all of that are within that. I think there's also an advantage in some of the countries that are not yet fully electrified because they don't have a legacy to transition from, but they can actually already build renewables. And some of the countries you cite in already have a higher renewable percentage, even in their installed base than us. And therefore, some of the findings we have from the study is that the new installation for renewables is actually cheaper, the new build, than if you were to put up a coal power plant, as an example. So they actually have, just like in the digital space, they actually have an opportunity to leapfrog. You are right that you cannot have a blanket approach, and I don't think anyone has that. You have to customize it to the country, given their emissions and their challenges. But I do think that there is an opportunity because technology has improved.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Is there anybody else who'd like to question or comment over there?
Hi, I'm Anna with C2ES. This question is more. If you can talk a little bit more about these terms, and if we don't have these terms, what can we do to help that drive that conversation to really bring attention to how important this is going to be?
Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah, and I think it's important to differentiate terms and structure. So I think structure, what we see coming through from the JET IP work, when we're getting concessional loans at at competitive rates. Yeah? So that's one angle of it. When we talk about terms, it's the form in which that translates into almost a term sheet at the end of the day. So things around decision-making rights, yeah, how that plays in the sort of early stages of a project. Things like the governance structure around how those funds are dispersed. Things like how do you need to report back on that finance once it comes in, and also the equity conversion terms that DFIs put into those term sheets. Those need to be almost thought of within almost a startup venture capitalist sort of space, right? And the DFI term sheet is not necessarily structured for that. So I think really thinking through how that can practically work and go beyond just the sort of bilateral mandate that DFIs have to a sort of project specific term sheet that really almost works as a bit of a VC fund is really what needs to be solved there, right?
Okay, we have time for one last question or comment over there.
Sorry, Dave Bryant, Member of Parliament. Just a very quick one, taking into consideration the current challenges that we're facing with energy in South Africa, does this plan factor in augmenting capacity in the short to medium term going forward, along with the goal of 2050?
Do you want to take that one?
I think if you are environmentally agnostic, which I'm sure no one attending this conference is, and you look at the economics of the different forms of power generation, the different technologies that are available, and you compare solar and wind, from a cost perspective, but more importantly for South Africa, from a time to construct, time to connect to the grid, then the choices start to make themselves. Even if you were able to get finance for new coal, potentially new nuclear, it would take 12 to 15 years to complete, with all of the attendant risks of mega projects that we're very well acquainted with in South Africa in particular. So if you want to solve the energy crisis as quickly as possible, then clearly renewable energy is the way to go, both solar and wind. I see a limited role for gas, very modest role for gas, sorry, GE. But I really think that we need to start thinking about the time value of capacity and what the cost to the economy is of unserved energy requirements, and then take our investment decisions accordingly.
Thank you. Thank you, Andre. Okay, I don't see any more hands. I want to just conclude. And as I've been sitting here, I've been thinking about three things that I've heard over the last week at the COP. The first thing is, in a number, I've been amazed at how in a number of these sessions, people have been quoting Madiba. It is impossible until it is done. I think that is the one thing that I've heard in at least 2 or 3 of the sessions at the conference. The second thing is, as we walked in last week, there was a group of youth who were demonstrating at the entrance to the conference. And essentially their message was, no more blah, blah. So stop talking, start doing. And the last one was Minister Creasy sat on one of the PCC panels early on last week and said that she thinks that the time has come for us to shift from the Ministry of Planning to the Ministry of Spanners. So I think that Steve and Kesh both referenced the need for implementation, and the fact that the next step in this project is really to work with the CEO champions around saying, what is the role of contribution of business to the doing, to making sure that this isn't a plan that sits on the table, but it is a plan that starts to hit the ground and to make an impact. And from the NBI, BUSA, and BCG, that really is where we see ourselves taking this work forward. It is work that we would like to see ourselves doing with all of you, not only with the business community, but much broader. We see ourselves working together within and across sectors. We see ourselves working together with government and with civil society in order to really to be able to take this vision forward across South Africa, because I think that fundamentally for all of us, I think that what we know is if we don't get going, our future becomes very bleak, both in the short and the long run. So we're looking forward to taking the work forward with all of you, and thank you very much for spending the last hour with us to hear about the work that we've done over the last 2.5 years as a contribution from business to the national conversation. Thank you.
Well done.